Hello and welcome to the show where I try and make a little sense out of this stunning and increasingly brave new world that we all live in by talking to a series of expert witnesses about their experiences, interests and concerns. It's important in life to be in touch with your feelings, but it's also crucial to be able to back those feelings up with facts. And so the purpose of this show is to push past purely personal or political promoting positions, separate fact from fiction and fake news headlines in the hope of uncovering important home truths. And today I'm talking some more Sense Not Sensibility with Philipp Tanzer, star of the recent BBC documentary I Am a Men's Rights Activist. At the end of the episode I'll be signposting you to a very simple way that you can join Philipp in a campaign to try and influence positive change, so stick around for that. But first, in part 2 of our discussion about the documentary, Philipp shares a remarkable, complex and extremely personal story about his mother that I feel the documentary makers could have explored in more detail. The revelation that Philipp's mother was murdered by her partner is a highly significant and impactful moment in the documentary, and the way that story was portrayed on screen is my biggest criticism of what I thought was an otherwise reasonably balanced character piece. I'll say a little more about that in a minute after I play the segment in question, so that once you hear Philipp's side of the story, you can make your own mind up.
The point isn't to tell you, don't judge, because judging will happen.
The most extreme situation in my life where I didn't judge was my mother was shot by her second husband, and he shot himself.
I'm judging right now.
Don't.
So would you like to share the circumstances, or?
My mother, she lived for 3 years with her second husband in South Africa. But there was a horrific moment of domestic violence where he beat her really badly and she ran away and she knew she had to leave him. She had already booked her flight to come back to Germany, and my brother and me, we were talking on the phone with my mom, and during this conversation I heard her talking to somebody in the background, and she said, "Oh, can you please leave the room? I'm talking to my boys." And then I heard how she was hit, and my brother took the telephone, and my brother heard how he heard 3 shots. And then the telephone was put on the hook. Yeah, after half an hour, we got the news that both my mom and her second husband were dead. So he shot her and then himself.
If some people had this experience, they would have maybe gone the way of like hating men.
Yes, of course I agree, and I can understand that people due to negative experiences become angry, but how does that help anybody? This anger should never inform your action. Your hope and love should inform your action.
And so I began this part of our interview by explaining to Philipp that when I first watched this part of the documentary, my instinct told me that there is probably something more to the story than we were being told. And as you're about to learn, it's not unreasonable to say that that turned out to be very much the case. But then again, Philipp is fairly philosophical about the complexities and art of editing hours of footage to capture the essence of a story. So perhaps my criticism about the final production is unduly harsh.
I would say that the way it was portrayed in the documentary was 100% fair. Okay. And like certain details about the death of my mother, I think they are not important. I think what was much more important was the fact how I dealt with it. Okay. And I think it was a wonderful example, and I really don't want to toot in my own horn because it's not my achievement for being a good person. I was born with that. I was born with forgiveness and compassion, I would say. Okay. And I'm very thankful for that. and I'm glad I was able to share the story. And this story, I think, showed two things. First of all, dear feminists, I understand that something tragic happened to you, but don't hate. Don't focus on hate. And it also showed that it did not inform me as a men's rights activist. And I'm a truly, I don't hate anybody. I don't hate men. I don't hate women. So I think at the same time, it portrayed me very, very positively. And it was a message towards people in general, not to hold on to anger and rage.
For the benefit of anybody maybe who either hasn't seen it or hasn't heard the perhaps slightly longer version of the story about your mother, could you maybe kind of share that with us now, about, you know, kind of basically ultimately what happened to your mother? And I appreciate this is a very, you know, kind of sensitive subject.
No, it's not.
But also how she came to be in that situation.
Yeah. So I think, unfortunately, I have to tell the whole story.
Yeah.
Because I think that when we look at domestic violence, it doesn't start in the relationship. It starts with how we grow up. It starts with a lot. And my mother, for example, didn't grow up with domestic violence, but she came from a background of very working class.
Okay.
But her mother, so my grandmother, always wanted to study, and she was very intelligent, but it was like after war times and stuff like that, so she couldn't have the career that she wanted. And I would say that my grandmother put a lot of the expectations of a higher life, a wealthier life, onto my mother in some ways. And my mother met my father, who was a dentist.
Okay.
And I would think that my grandparents on my mother's side thought that's a good catch.
Okay.
And my father is a very good man, a very stable man. And my father's background is a background without a lot of love in his family. His parents were highly educated, especially my grandfather, but he was not very emotional, a little bit of a tyrant, not domestic abuse at all, but just a typical patriarch, I would say.
Okay.
And his parents actually, dumping is a harsh word, but they dumped him with other parts of the family. So he didn't spend time with his parents during a certain time, and then he was sent to boarding school. So I would say he never experienced how to express love, and definitely not intimacy either. So when my parents got married, they have very different personality types. My mom is very outgoing, social, loves to interact with people, bubbly personality, I would say. And my father is very shy, rather shy, quiet, and he actually doesn't need a lot of status. And the dynamics my father became a great provider. He bought a grand house, and he was working a lot. It was the like 70s, 80s, then later 80s. So there was a lot of money to be made as a dentist, and that's what he did. And we had a housemaid, for example. I mean, not like she wasn't wearing a typical housemaid's dress. It wasn't like in the UK, like
didn't live in the basement. Yeah. Okay.
No, not at all, not at all. She was just helping for a couple of hours a day. But so we weren't poor, and you could say the perfect life in some regards. But my father was a provider, not a lover.
Okay.
And in Germany we have this saying that the thing that every man is looking for is the holy whore. So the mother, like a good person, but in bed, really dirty. Yeah. And I
Similar here. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think women are looking for the providing stallion, for the tamed animal. And my father was just tamed.
Okay.
And my mother, because she wanted to help, well, she wanted to be her own person.
Okay.
She wanted to make money, and she
Yeah.
started an import-export company. And they didn't make a lot of money, but
Okay.
when you do import-export, you meet interesting people from all different walks of life.
Yeah.
And I don't actually exactly know how they met him, but they met an investor who was an ambassador for the Iranian government.
Okay.
He lived in the south of France, an older man, like age-wise more like my grandfather, and my mother, she started an affair with him. It's not 100% clear to what extent this affair was to get the investment,
Okay.
but the thing is, just because he was older, just because you would say, oh, he wasn't attractive, doesn't mean that he couldn't fill the emotional or the sexual and emotional needs that my mother had
Yeah.
of not feeling desired. So I don't blame my mother. It's just like we're humans. We make mistakes, and it would have been great if my mother and my father could have like just gone to couple therapy.
Sure.
But she ended up cheating on my father and having a relationship with this man over a long period of time. And that at one point that came out. And I would say that in many regards, my father acted like a professional cock,
Okay.
and
Okay.
almost defended the the guy in front of my grandparents, because my grandparents found out, and my grandfather, he threatened the guy who was at times living under our roof, and so
Wow. Okay.
my grandfather like threatened, like pretty much, to get your hands off my daughter, and my father defended the guy like, how dare you attack our good friend.
Okay.
Yeah, so um but later on, obviously my father had to realize that maybe there was some truth to the story. Never mind. So later on, my mom, she met somebody else, and he through the import-export business, and he was from South Africa.
Okay.
There were actually two. First, there was one shady person from South Africa who wanted to make illegal import-export stuff with my mom, and he introduced somebody else to my mom, and that was a guy called Dirk Berg. And people can Google him. It's quite interesting because there's a little bit about him online, his involvement in like a murder case. And so he was
Say the name again.
Dirk Berg.
That's a brilliant name.
It's like a porn actor, right?
like a movie, yeah.
Yeah, it's like very, very James Bond, very James Bond. And yeah, Dirk Stoffberg. So he was a weapon dealer, and he was involved in a. I mean, do I have proof? No, but that's what my mom told us, and that's what everybody told us. He was a leader of a killer commander for the old government, so for the apartheid government, and apparently he was connected to the murder of a woman called Dulcie September, who was an activist for the ANC.
Okay.
And yeah, he was an asshole.
Sounds it.
He was he was older. He was rough around the edges. He had a huge charisma of dominance, I would say. In some regards, when you watch James Bond, which one is it? With Christopher Lee as the bad guy.
Man with the golden gun.
I think that's the one. I think that's the one. So a little bit like that. So not
Okay.
handsome,
Okay.
but something about him.
Kind of sophisticated to an extent.
Yeah, sophisticated on the surface, but really dangerous
Yeah.
and a potential danger and brutish underneath.
Yeah. Okay.
And I think my mom was very attracted to that.
Yeah.
So she engaged in an affair with him, and there were situations where, for example, he demonstrated on her how to slice somebody's throat, and he with a real knife, and so it would leave like a tiny, not a cut, because there was nothing through the skin, but you know when you're like, you feel
Yeah,
that
yeah.
there is something, and to impress my mom, and I'm pretty sure that my mom found that incredibly attractive and sexy, how skillful he was. So she started this relationship, and she left the family for him.
Okay.
And again, I don't hold that against her. I mean, I found my dad boring, and I didn't feel very connected to he's a great guy, and we get on really, really well. But he wasn't the dad I wanted. I wanted a dad, not just a father or provider. He
Okay.
didn't play, like when we went on ski. I'm so sorry for like telling the story so big, but I
No,
think,
no, it's because it's. I think that one of my points is it's such a fascinating story. I just can't believe he told so little of it.
well, because I mean, it was a 24-minute
Sure.
documentary. You can't go into that in that such detail. So, for example, when we went on holiday, skiing holiday, my father stayed in the holiday place, and my mom and we went skiing because my father said, I can't break a bone because then I can't provide.
Okay.
So my father stayed at home reading while we were skiing, and we at times had like a ski trainer, and I would call him my ski dad.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
so sad. And I would call him my ski dad in front of my dad, not knowing how painful that potentially is. But also my dad wouldn't my at in situations like that, I wish my dad would have said there something is going wrong here.
Yeah. I guess that's life, really, isn't it? That
Yeah,
sort of.
absolutely. I don't blame my dad. I don't blame my mom. It's just life. It's just life. It's a story that life tells. But okay, to go back to the story
Yeah.
because
Go.
yeah, I have to finish it. So they lived a life of like a little bit of a spy life,
Okay.
but
Yeah.
he didn't have a lot of finances anymore, and there was a lot of stuff going on, like moving from Switzerland to Germany. And my grandparents, my mother's parents, they kept informing the police and informing the American police because there was a search warrant on him. And so our life became a little bit of a crime story. And he actually said, stop informing the police or something happens. And then we had the police kind of like guarding our way to school. We as children weren't really aware of that. And it was more like, ooh, this is exciting.
And what sort of age would you? You've got a brother, isn't it? Is that?
Yeah. I think something, it must have been around maybe 11,
Okay.
10,
Okay.
10, 11, maybe a bit younger, 9, 10. It's hard to say, really
Okay.
hard to
Okay.
say, because I was a kid. It's
Yeah.
difficult because I remember that we lived in one particular house when that happened, but I'm like, really? Was I that young? I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know.
But the
And
point was you weren't kind of late teens kind of thing. You were
no,
still very much a kid.
yeah, I would say so. And I yeah, so life was a crime story, and eventually my grandparents did manage to get him arrested when he crossed the border from Switzerland to Germany. He was arrested, and then they sent him to America, and he was in prison in America.
Okay.
And then my mom obviously wanted to get him out of prison, so she asked my dad if she could have money to get him out of prison, and so my dad gave her money, to get him out of prison. Yeah, that's why I said he's a really good cock. But he's such a good man, and I hope. I'm so happy that he did all of this because he did it out of love and because she's the mother of his children, and yeah, he's a good guy. He's just a good guy.
No, I can understand that, and particularly as you say, she is the mother of his children.
Yeah, and she's not a bad person. She has never been a bad person. She just we make mistakes. And so she went over to America, and what I learned later on, she actually blackmailed the American government because they had some information on a hostage trade deal that happened, which the American government really didn't want to make public because it was pre-election or something.
Yeah.
I don't know, like crazy shit. I'm like, what?
Yeah.
What the fuck? And he got out, but they said, we put you on a plane to South Africa, and there's no other place than South Africa where you can be, as if you leave South Africa, you go back to prison. And my mother was given the option, and that was like literally, like, as far as I know, she was on the airport, and they said, okay, you can go back to Germany, or you can go to South Africa. And she went with him to South Africa, and then they started a life there, predominantly with money of my dad, as far as I know.
Okay.
But he did try to make money, and he did try to write a book, and they tried to still deal with stuff. For example, red mercury, which is used to create nuclear weapons, as far as I know.
Wow.
Yeah, and we would visit them like twice a year, and yeah, he was not a nice person, but it was okay. And as far as I know, there was no domestic violence going on, as in physical violence. There was definitely a power dynamic that in the beginning my mom very much appreciated, I think. Later, when it became more and more obvious, very important, the apartheid regime was gone.
Yes.
So his connections were gone, and he was in a country that wasn't the country that he supported, so to speak, and
probably had made quite a few enemies as well, I would imagine.
Yes, I would imagine. It never felt like he was threatened, though, and the area where they lived, an area called Hartbeespoort, it felt very peaceful, and interestingly enough, I never felt racial tension. Well, I felt racial tensions once. We were in a restaurant, and he treated the waiter really bad, and I said something, and I was like, that's not how you talk to people.
Yeah.
But so I didn't feel a threat for him, but there was definitely no support for him, and you could feel that his ego was crumbling. And I think that's what we see in a lot of cases of familicide, where just your surroundings are crumbling. You lose your job, you lose your relationship, you lose this and this and this and this.
Yeah.
And I would say that the power dynamic between him and my mom, which before was something that my mom, I would say, appreciated, even though I think it was unhealthy, turned into coercive control.
Yeah. Okay.
And his choice of words became demeaning, and it became so demeaning that the last time we were in South Africa, and that was quite rapid. So within like 2 years or one year, it changed from like actually being okay-ish, if you want to call it that, to this is not okay.
Okay.
And by that time, I was 15 years old, and I saw him interacting like that with my mom, and I can't deal with injustice, and I can't deal with people being not treated well. So I spoke up, and I was like, this is not, you do not talk to my mom like this.
Okay.
And he said, your mom is an adult and your mom can speak for herself. And I said, I don't have the feeling that she can speak for herself. I feel like she's under your control, and it's my job as her son to protect her. And that ended in a loud argument, and I was sent to my room.
Okay.
And in my room, I was waiting, and then he came back to my room. He was sent to my room by my mom because my mom said they're only here for 2 weeks, and can we please have peaceful time? I want to spend the time in peace as a not family, but. And so he sat down, and I could tell that he was told to be nice or something like that.
Yeah.
And he was like, look, we don't want to fight, and your mom told me to come here and to make peace, and you have to understand that your mom is not your mother anymore. She's my wife now.
Okay. Okay.
And I'm like, and I knew that my mother would never be okay with something like that.
Yeah.
She loved us, and we loved her. And then he continued to say, so she's not your mother anymore, she's my wife, and she loves me. Go ask her. Go ask her. Go ask her. And
Okay.
he wanted me to ask her if she loved him, and I knew the answer would be yes. So I was like, okay, I will ask her. And then I went through and said, okay, he told me to ask you a question, and the question is it true that you're not our mother anymore?
Yeah. Okay.
And only his wife? And she was like, what? No, of course not. And then she started standing up against him.
Yeah.
And she started to free herself from his control. Well, first they had a little bit of a fight, but it was an okay fight considering was what he said and what happened. And then my brother, my mother, and me, we spent the rest of the time together, and he was kind of hiding in the house and doing his own stuff. And by the end of the holiday, they kind of made peace was made, and it was like, okay, let's come on. Shitty stuff was said. Let's come back together to the table. But from this point on, my mom, she was not subservient to him anymore, or she was free emotionally. The curse of control was broken.
Okay.
But because his life went more and more downhill, and she knew she's going to leave him at one point.
Yeah.
Something happened, and as far as I know, it was the only time of physical domestic violence, but I wasn't there, so I can't say. My mom said it was the first time. He brutally beat her up, like horribly, and she ran away and tried to reach a German family in South Africa, which lived quite a few miles away. And she didn't have a car, so she ran away and ran there, but she didn't reach them. And he picked her up and took her back home.
Okay.
But at this point, she knew she had to escape. She had to leave. And she told him that this was it. She had to leave. She started to plan coming back to Germany. Flights were booked, and then my my brother and me, we had a phone call, and we were talking about if if our pets would stay in South Africa or if they would come over here. And during this conversation, somebody else came into the room and said, and my mom said, oh, could you please leave the room? I'm talking to the boys. And then the person, I know it was him, because the way she talked to the person was very familiar.
Sure.
And she said, please leave the room. I'm talking to the boys. And then I heard that she was beaten.
Okay.
And then I was shouting for my brother, and I said, Alex, come over. He's beating her. And my brother was listening, and then my brother actually heard 3 shots. And then the telephone was hung up. And obviously we were freaking out, and it's really interesting how your mind works in these moments, because we're like, he shot the dogs, or he shot into the roof, or like you're like, nothing happened, nothing bad has happened. And we called our German friends and we said, call the police immediately, call the ambulance, send them over. And my brother tried to call, but nobody picked up. And after a while, somebody picked up. It was the police. And we said, oh, what happened? And they said, oh, we're going to call you back. And my brother heard in the background photographs being taken.
Okay.
And then altogether after half an hour, they called us and they told us that both my mom and him, that both were dead.
Yeah.
And obviously, like, the thing is, because there was a lot of stuff with spy stuff going on, there were some theories that they were both shot and that it was actually more to do with Mossad or something like that. But the thing is, like, first of all, I don't believe that, because I listened to it, and if it was another person, it must have been a friend of them. And he was violent to her before.
Sure.
So
yeah, I mean, certainly, I mean, the way you describe it, it wouldn't have even occurred to me that it would have been anybody else.
And it doesn't matter. I mean, they're both dead.
Sure.
He was a violent person. He had beaten her up before. So I'm not looking for any excuses or anything. And this is just, I like, afterwards, when something fucked up like that happens, you try to make sense of it, and you try to look at it from so many angles. And a couple of months, and to be honest, I think I dealt with it as good as you can, and I wasn't upset with him, because I know he was a broken person as well. He grew up in apartheid South Africa, and he grew up in a certain family, and he had negative behaviors, and I am pretty sure he had strong sociopathic tendencies, because I don't think that you can be part of a killer commando without that. That's just, I mean, he was not a normal man. He was the most extreme version of negative or of dominant masculinity. He was the dark side of that. So he was not a prime example of man.
Yes. And that, I mean,
he was an archetype. He was an archetype. That's why we watch James Bond movies, because there are two archetypes. And James Bond himself is also a sociopath, by the way.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, it's a very unique skill set. And, I suppose it's a story told many times that, but, particularly young men complain about this, that, kind of women are very often attracted to that sort of dark side of masculinity, or the bad boy. And that can be complicated in terms of then sort of when they're particularly attracted to that side, but do the trade-off of maybe kind of, settling with somebody that doesn't fulfill. And obviously the story can be repeated on the opposite sex as well, as you say.
The dangerous woman. Like, the thing is, honestly, like, the most attractive women that I met were crazy. They were really narcissistic, and there's actually a study saying that narcissist women are the best in bed.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's that, here we, like, in Ireland, we have this saying similar to in Germany, where it's like you want kind of an angel in the kitchen and a whore in the bedroom kind of thing. And so again, obviously, many men will settle down with somebody who doesn't.
And obviously, we do not say that women should be in the kitchen.
No.
It's an old saying, and it's a representation of the family.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I suppose kind of, another phrase is Madonna and whore, the expectation of kind of like the perfect mother figure, but also, kind of the fulfiller of all sort of sexual needs for the man. And the reality then is, like, many men have affairs, and one of the reasons for that is, potentially they very much want their home life, but something isn't being fulfilled, so they go, so everybody's human, and it's not a kind of boys versus girl, one sex is perfect kind of thing. But yeah, no, thank you for sharing that, because it is, well, first of all, it's a very personal story and a very tragic story, but it is also an amazing story in many regards. And I suppose that was kind of the primary reason. And I do accept what you say, that it was a 25-minute program, and there's no way that story could have been captured within that. But I did
for example, I'm not gay. I started dating women when I was 32, and I'm looking for my wife, and I'm still attracted to men, but I haven't called myself gay for a very, very long time. And even when I was exclusively dating men, I wouldn't refer to myself as gay. And in the documentary, that wasn't mentioned. It was portrayed as if I was gay. And for example, Sargon did a video about an article about me, and I was constantly referred to as gay, and in the comic section, it was like everybody was like, "Oh, he's a pretty nice guy, though he's gay," or something like that. And I'm like, actually, I'm not. But I understand that if Alvaro would have mentioned that I started dating women, it would have just added to confusion, and it would have even portrayed me as confused, unstable, or something like that. So I'm like, you have to cut certain things out. That's just how it is.
No, I absolutely, I can understand that. And the fact that you were kind of a gay porn star is obviously something that is, that's, well, it's part of you, but it's sort of, that's something that's kind of, they've got to include in the TV show, one would think.
It's too spicy. It's too spicy.
Exactly. And I can understand that sort of not mentioning, I mean, is bisexual, is that the term you prefer, or just okay.
Philipp. Just
Philipp. Okay. But yeah, so
oh my God, that sounded like Jess Phillips. Just Philipp.
Yeah, Jess Phillips. But yeah, the complexity that is you can be difficult to kind of distill in a 25-minute documentary. Yeah. So I understand what you're saying, and in the same way, the story of your mother obviously cannot be kind of told in full. But I did feel that, and maybe this was just my perception, because I think you feel differently about this, I felt in the way that it was presented, the fact that there was so much else to that story changed the story, or changed the point of telling that story, if that makes sense.
Why?
Okay. So the immediate thing I kind of thought about was, I'm not sure if you're familiar, and I can't remember their names, but there are a couple of brothers whose mother.
Oh yeah, Callum. Was it? What was her name? I think her last name was Callum. She killed her ex-husband with like 25 blows to the head with a hammer.
Yeah.
And she went to prison for it. And her sons were fighting for her release, because the father was coercively controlling, which was an excuse for the woman killing him, even though it was in cold blood, because she went over with a hammer in her handbag and killed him. And I think there is a lot to the story, and I can completely understand that if you have emotionally been held down and destroyed for your whole life, that you do want revenge. But the narrative became so feminist, and I would say that these two boys were used by feminist groups as I thought they were abused. The thing is, they did it willingly, and very, very willingly, and I'm very happy for them that their mom got released, and I think it's probably okay that she was released. But the same compassion should be extended to all perpetrators, because you have to look at the whole picture all the time. But it was very one-sided, obviously.
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, I would largely agree. I'm kind of, I'm not sure where I necessarily stand on her being released, or her basically overturning the premeditated aspect of that. But I agree. I agree. These things are very complicated, and I haven't looked at that story in great detail, so I'm not going to judge it. But the one thing that I was particularly thinking about those two sons is that obviously an experience like that is going to impact your life and perhaps take it in a certain direction and take your views in a certain direction. And the thing that I'm very disappointed in them, given that they have experienced domestic violence of quite an extreme aspect, is they are very welded to the gendered violence narrative, and are so they are two men that speak about domestic violence, that speak about it in a way that makes men invisible in that narrative. So, and again, I think you have to walk in somebody else's shoes to fully understand their motivation, etc. But the reason that I thought of them was because, well, okay, so there are two people that had, in some ways, a similar experience to you, in some ways very different, who went to a very ideological place in that respect. And it struck me that sort of, because they presented this story, and you are very committed to men's human rights, I perhaps saw it as possibly a slight inference that, well, that's why, for some strange reason, you have gone in that direction because of that story. And I just felt that.
So he was questioning me. So I told him the story, and then he said, well, why didn't this tragic experience make you hate men, so to speak, or and I think it's a fair question. question.
Yeah, absolutely.
And obviously the huge difference between the Cullum brothers and me is I don't have a gendered approach to domestic violence. Yeah. I just think female victims need help just like male victims. And when I hear about a woman being a victim of domestic violence, I feel as deeply as with men. But when it comes to female victims, I'm happy that they have access to help.
Yeah,
that's the difference.
Yeah, no, and that's, as I say, it's probably an emotional reaction for me in terms of I'm speaking that it's sort of, that's how I felt as opposed to necessarily how it was, and it definitely, you're seeing it differently.
Yeah,
you've had that experience of working with that production team, so you obviously don't feel that they've misrepresented you.
Oh.
But I suppose the one thing that I was left feeling from that story was there's more to that story, and kind of boy, was there more to that story. And I guess I guess what knowing that story now, what I would like to have seen is at least some mention of your father. I think in that sense that kind of, I suppose, I mean, to be overly critical of your mother, you could criticize her for bringing a violent person into your home when you were children. And
well, first of all, she didn't bring him into our home.
Okay.
And there was no. I didn't feel threatened. So
no.
Yeah.
The thing that struck me is you'd said about the police escort to school or something like that. So but I suppose kind of just the main point is that sort of you had a father who was sort of very grounded and is perhaps a better ambassador for masculinity than. No. Okay.
I would say that they were both two negative examples of masculinity. I would say that I would say that my father is a wolf who's or like a dog whose teeth were pulled out or who lost his teeth, and who is super obedient, and when somebody else comes into the house, like a burglar, would hide under the table, where the other guy, Dirk, was just like a rabid wolf. And the balance is in the middle, and I would say most men are in the middle. I think that my father was do you know Jack Donovan, the writer?
The biker.
Writer. He's a writer.
I don't think so.
Okay, so Jack Donovan, he wrote a book called The Way of Man. It's the best book written about masculinity.
Okay.
And he is kind of a hyper masculine person, which is interesting. He used to call himself androphile, so he likes men as well, which I think is why he wrote this book about masculinity, because he had to question his own masculinity. Great book, I can really recommend. But when you read it, it does make you feel uncomfortable, because it kind of shows how far away each one of us is from being like this man. Yeah.
Okay.
But he, in the very beginning, he says something very important. He says, this book is about how to be good at being a man, not about how to be a good man.
Yes.
My father was a good man, and I would almost go as far as saying Dirk was good at being a man. But Jack Donovan, in his book, states very clearly that the manliest man, the most masculine man, are sometimes the villains. And so when we look at Darth Vader, or like look at the examples of like brutish man, people are like, well, that's a proper man, but
he's not a good man.
Somebody
needs to
take this person down.
Yeah, I take your point, and I kind of take back actually what I said. What I suppose what I actually kind of meant was they're two examples of men. You know, kind of they're both, because there's no point denying that some men are very bad. Kind of, or do bad things, and there's a spectrum, and men are complex. But I suppose the way you're saying it kind of is maybe more to what I'm getting at, that your father was a good man, and this other gentleman did a very bad thing to your mother, kind of thing, and that I just felt that aspect of the story was probably the bit that was possibly particularly important to include. But that's just my that was my personal gut instinct, and I'm very pleased to know that you don't feel that you don't feel that they cheated you in that sense, that you were happy with. Yeah, so that's
and including the story, especially including the story in such a, let's say, male negative way. I thought it actually put a much stronger emphasis on the fact that I don't judge. So that pain should not inform your view on life.
Which, in fairness, is a pretty good philosophy to live your life by. Anyway, let me know your thoughts in the comments, and my thanks again to Philipp for being such a fascinating guest. Philipp has been working hard developing a men's rights think tank come information hub come campaign group called Unity for Men, and If you want to keep track of developments, then you should definitely follow him on Twitter. I'll leave those details along with an email address in the hope that you will sign up to Unity for Men's first campaign. My previous video about the Baroness and the MP includes details of the amendments that Philip Davis MP has submitted to the Domestic Violence Bill, which is currently going through the UK Parliament. Those amendments aim to make the bill more gender inclusive, and Unity for Men have developed a template letter asking members of Parliament to support the proposed amendments when the bill comes before the House. And they hope to coordinate meaningful engagement with all 650 democratically elected members at a local level. And to do this, they need the help of 650 local constituents willing to contact their local MP. I've included contact details in the low bar, and if you want to sign up for the campaign, simply send a quick email with the heading MP Letter Campaign, confirming your postcode, your constituency, and the name of your MP. Philip will then send you a template letter and make a note of any response that you receive. So if you think you could spare 10 minutes of your time, check out the links below. Finally, I'll also encourage you to check out Philip's excellent art portfolio, which showcases yet another aspect of his many talents, including the piece featured in the thumbnail of this episode. Thanks again for listening, and please help keep this show on the road via the holy trinity of like, share and subscribe. Look after yourself and each other, and if you see an elephant...
Can't you see it too? There's an elephant in the room.
The Glass Blind Spot is brought to you by you, because it's your views, your likes and your comments that keep this show on the road.